In the unforgiving heartland, where fortunes are built on grit and destroyed by greed, a new legend is about to be told. Before the harvest begins, offer your tribute. If you believe in the triumph of the underdog, show your support with a like. Join our community by subscribing so you won't miss the secrets buried in the land. Now, prepare yourselves. The dust tasted of failure. It was a fine, gritty powder that coated everything on the Gable farm. The drooping leaves of the corn stalks, the rust-pocked hood of the old Ford pickup, the worried lines etched around Eleanor Gable's eyes. She stood on her porch, a frail silhouette against the harsh afternoon sun, clutching a sheaf of papers that felt heavier than a tombstone. Foreclosure. The word was an obscenity in a place that had sustained her family for 4 generations, a place seeded with the sweat of her husband, his father, and his father's father. There are truths that only reveal themselves when everything we know falls apart. For Eleanor, the truth was that 100 years of sacrifice could be nullified by a single piece of paper. A debt her late husband, a good man with a gambler's optimism for the weather, had left behind like a landmine buried in their legacy. The bank, once a place of friendly handshakes, had become a cold institution of clipped phone calls and final notices. Hope was a commodity she could no longer afford. That's why the 3 black SUVs, appearing like heat-shimmering mirages on the long dirt road, felt less like a rescue and more like a surrender. They were vultures, circling what was left of a life, their polished chrome glinting with predatory promise. In the corner of the yard, leaning against the weathered gray wood of the barn, a man stood motionless, watching them approach. His name was Sam, though few people ever heard him speak enough to use it. To the world, he was just part of the scenery, as silent and unremarkable as the fence posts he spent his days mending. For 5 years, he had been a fixture, the quiet farmhand who appeared one day asking for work and had never left. His clothes were stained with the soil he worked, his hands calloused and cracked, his face a roadmap of sun and hardship that concealed more than it revealed. He was invisible, a ghost who haunted the periphery of Eleanor's grief. And in that moment, as the polished vehicles of corporate power kicked up the dust of her family's ruin, Sam's invisibility was about to become the most dangerous weapon on the battlefield. The lead SUV, a Lincoln Navigator with windows as black and opaque as a predator's eyes, crunched to a halt just feet from the wilting rose bushes Eleanor's grandmother had planted 70 years ago. The driver's door opened, and a man emerged, not so much stepping out as being presented to the world. He was Mr. Liu, a name that had been spoken in reverent whispers by the bank manager, a name synonymous with salvation or acquisition, depending on which side of the table you were on. He wore a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than the farm's tractor, and his shoes, gleaming despite the dust, seemed to defy the very ground they stood on. He moved with the frictionless certainty of a man who never encountered obstacles, only opportunities. 2 younger men, his lieutenants, fanned out behind him, their expressions a perfect blend of ambition and disdain. They scanned the Gable farm not as a home or a legacy, but as a line item, a square on a map to be colored in with their company's logo. Eleanor smoothed her worn apron, a nervous tick she couldn't control, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Mr. Liu," she said, her voice thin but polite, the product of a lifetime of Midwestern hospitality clashing with raw terror. "Thank you for coming all this way." Liu offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a facial configuration, a tool he used to put his marks at ease before the dissection began. "Eleanor," he said, the name rolling off his tongue with a practiced, false familiarity. "Please call me David. We are here to help you, to offer a solution that benefits everyone." His gaze flickered past her for a fraction of a second, assessing the house, The barn, the very air, calculating value and decay. Sam, still by the barn, shifted his weight. A minute, almost imperceptible movement. He didn't move closer, didn't make a sound. He just watched. His presence was so unassuming that the three men in suits didn't even register him as a person. To them, he was an object, a piece of farm equipment left out in the sun. One of the younger men, a sharp-faced go-getter named Chen, nudged his colleague and muttered something under his breath. Sam didn't need to hear it to know its meaning. Look at the local fauna. The contempt was a physical force, radiating off them like the heat from their car engines. Sam's gaze remained placid, but inside, a switch was flipped. A part of him he had kept dormant for years. A cold, analytical engine began to hum to life. He started cataloging details. The cut of their suits, the aggressive knot of Liu's tie, the almost too eager posture of Chen. They were a team, but not a cohesive one. There was hierarchy, but also rivalry, a vulnerability. They moved to the rickety porch, the expensive leather of their shoes scuffing on the unpainted planks. Eleanor, ever the gracious host even at her own execution, offered them iced tea. Liu accepted a glass with a nod, holding it with 2 fingers as if it might be contaminated. The negotiation began, but it was never a negotiation. It was a dictation. Liu spoke in soothing, condescending tones about market realities, about the burden of debt, about the generous offer his company, Apex Global, was making. It was, he assured her, the only way she could walk away with anything, with her dignity intact. He painted a picture of her future, a small apartment in town, freedom from worry, a comfortable if diminished existence. He was selling her a smaller cage, telling her it was freedom. As Liu laid out the terms in English, his eyes would occasionally flick to his associates, and he would switch seamlessly into Mandarin. The shift was jarring. The language changed, but so did the entire atmosphere. The mask of the benevolent savior dropped, replaced by the cold, hard face of a conqueror. Sam, who had been methodically cleaning the dirt from a shovel head with an old rag, stilled his hands. He leaned the shovel against the barn wall and listened. The Mandarin was fluent, rapid fire, laced with the casual arrogance of men who believe they are the only smart people in the room, utterly secure in their linguistic fortress. "She's buying every word of it," Liu said in Mandarin, a smirk playing on his lips as he took a delicate sip of tea. The preliminary geological surveys were even better than we hoped. The aquamarine deposits under the North Pasture are extensive. Forget the farmland. The water rights alone will net us a 50-fold return on this paltry offer. Chen, the younger associate, chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering across pavement. "She's probably worried about keeping the family Bible. She has no idea she's sitting on a fortune in strategic resources." He glanced over toward the barn, his gaze dismissive as it passed over Sam. "Look at that dirty animal over there. This is what these people are. Mules, born to work the land their betters will own. It's the natural order of things." The other associate, a man named Wei, added with a sneer, "Do you think he even understands we're buying the ground out from under his feet? He's probably just wondering if he'll still have a job tomorrow." They laughed. It was a quiet, sharp sound like ice cracking. They were so secure in their superiority, so wrapped in the bubble of their own language and perceived intelligence, that they spoke their conspiracy aloud in the open air. They were stealing a woman's birthright right in front of her, and mocking the man who worked her land, all while she smiled nervously, believing them to be her saviors. Sam's face remained a blank canvas. Inside, a cold, quiet anger began to solidify. It was an old feeling, one he had thought he'd buried for good under tons of earth and years of silence. He had spent years cultivating this quiet life, seeking peace in the mindless, honest rhythm of physical labor. He had fled a world of brilliant, predatory men just like these. He had wanted nothing more than to be left alone with the dirt and the sky. But fate has a cruel way of giving us exactly what we need at the moment we least expect it. And what Sam needed, what the universe had just delivered to this dusty farmyard, was a reason to remember who he used to be. The shovel felt heavy in his hands. It was a tool for digging, for turning over the soil. But sometimes, you had to dig up things that had been buried for a very long time. The charade on the porch continued. Liu pushed a thick, leather-bound contract across the weathered table toward Eleanor. The thud it made seemed to echo the final nail being hammered into a coffin. "Just sign here, Eleanor," Liu said, his English once again as smooth as silk, "and all your troubles will be over." Eleanor's hand trembled as she reached for the pen he offered, a heavy, gold-plated instrument that looked alien on the rustic table. She was about to sign away everything. Her past, her future, the very ground that held the bones of her ancestors. The pen felt cold, metallic, the instrument of her final capitulation. Chen, bored with the proceedings and puffed up with his own cleverness, let his eyes wander back to Sam. The silent farmhand was still there, a statue of dirt and denim, his gaze fixed on the scene at the porch. It unnerved Chen, this silent observation. It felt like a judgment. He decided to amuse himself, and in doing so, impress his boss with a display of casual cruelty. He plucked a page from the middle of the contract. He stood up and strolled off the porch, the document held delicately between his thumb and forefinger as if it were something distasteful. He walked right up to Sam, stopping a few feet away, making a show of looking him up and down, from his mud-caked work boots to his sweat-stained hat. "Hey," Chen said, his voice loud, dripping with condescension. "You, farmhand." Sam didn't answer. He just looked at Chen, his eyes calm and steady, two blue chips of ice in a weathered face. Chen smirked and waved the contract page. "I've got a little game for you, a bit of fun." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick money clip, fanning the bills under Sam's nose. He peeled off a stack crisp, new $100 notes. He counted out $10,000, making a show of licking his thumb. $10,000, old man, cash. It's yours if you can do one simple thing for me. He thrust the paper toward Sam. "Just read the title of this document, that's it. I bet you $10,000 you can't even read the title. Go on, give it a try." The insult hung in the hot, still air. It was a multifaceted cruelty, a mockery of Sam's presumed illiteracy, a display of wealth so casual it was obscene, and a complete dehumanization of the man standing before him. It was a power play intended for an audience of one. "Mr. Liu." Eleanor shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly against the wooden planks. "That's enough," she cried, her voice shaking with outrage. "Sam is a good, hard-working man. You will not mock him on my property." Liu held up a placating hand, a faint, amused smile on his face. "Eleanor, please. My associate is merely being playful, a little sport to lighten the mood. Let him have his fun. It's a generous offer. Perhaps your man could use the money." The implication was clear. "Sit down. You are in no position to make demands." Eleanor sank back into her chair, defeated and humiliated on Sam's behalf, the fight draining out of her. All eyes were on Sam. The world seemed to shrink to the small patch of dusty ground between him and the smug young man from the city. For a long moment, Sam did nothing. He just stood there, his expression unreadable. Chen's smirk widened. He was winning. He was proving his point. This dirt-streaked animal was too stupid to even respond. Then Sam moved. It was a slow, deliberate motion. He took the shovel he had been leaning on and gently, quietly, stuck its blade into the soft earth beside him. He straightened up, his full height surprising Chen, who had to tilt his head back slightly. Sam took off his worn leather-work gloves, tucking one into the other and placing them on a nearby fence post with the care of a surgeon setting down his instruments. Then he methodically began to wipe his hands on the sides of his overalls, removing the worst of the grime. Each movement was precise, unhurried, pregnant with a tension that was becoming unbearable. The smirk on Chen's face began to falter, replaced by a flicker of uncertainty. Sam stepped forward and took the offered page from Chen's hand. The contrast was stark: the clean, manicured fingers of the city boy and the calloused, earth-stained hand of the farm worker. The crisp, heavy-bond paper against the rough, scarred skin. Sam held the document as if weighing it. He didn't look at it immediately. Instead, he reached into the pocket of his faded chambray shirt and produced something that seemed utterly out of place. A pair of simple, elegant, wire-rimmed reading glasses. He unfolded them with a quiet click. He breathed on the lenses, a small cloud of vapor in the dry air, and polished them with a clean corner of his shirt. He settled the glasses on the bridge of his nose, the gesture methodical and academic. Only then did he lower his gaze to the paper. The silence stretched. Liu watched with detached amusement. Chen's bravado was curdling into confusion. Sam's voice, when it came, was quiet but clear, with a gravelly timbre from disuse, yet every syllable was perfectly enunciated. He read the English title aloud: Asset Acquisition and Mineral Rights Transfer Agreement. A bit wordy for what it is. He paused, letting the simple act of reading sink in. Then he lifted his eyes from the page and looked directly at Chen. The calm, steady gaze had been replaced by something sharp and analytical, like a blade being unsheathed. And then he spoke again, but not in English. He switched to Mandarin. It was not the conversational, slang-filled Mandarin that Liu and his team had been using. This was the Mandarin of scholars and diplomats, a pure, unaccented, devastatingly precise Beijing dialect that was as out of place in this dusty farmyard as a symphony orchestra. Of course, Sam said in this perfect Mandarin, his tone cool and academic. The title is deliberately misleading. A more accurate title would be Agreement for the Uncompensated Expropriation of Subterranean and Riparian Assets Without Recourse. But I suppose that wouldn't have sounded as friendly to Mrs. Gable. Chen's jaw went slack. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, sickened pallor. His mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. Liu, who had been leaning back in his chair on the porch, sat bolt upright, his placid expression shattering like glass. The iced tea glass slipped from his fingers and hit the porch with a dull thud, spilling its contents in a dark stain on the old wood. Sam wasn't finished. He tapped a specific paragraph on the page with his forefinger. And your legal team should be more careful. Here in the preamble, you've used the character for fu, as in to pay, when describing Apex's obligations. However, the context clearly requires the homophone fu, as in to bear responsibility for. It's a common mistake for businessmen who prioritize speed over accuracy. One implies a simple transaction. The other implies a fiduciary duty. It's a small error, but in a court of law, it would be a very, very expensive one. He lowered the paper and looked from Chen's stunned face to Liu's ashen one. He pushed his glasses slightly up his nose. The silence was no longer tense. It was absolute. It was the silence of a chessboard after a move so brilliant and unexpected that the game is instantly over. The farmhand, the dirty animal, the mule, had just corrected their grammar in their own secret language, and in doing so, had dismantled their entire world. Sam turned his back on the frozen investors, the dismissive gesture more powerful than any shout. He walked calmly onto the porch, the contract page still in his hand, and stood before Eleanor. His voice, when he spoke to her, was gentle again, stripped of the cold precision he had used on her tormentors. He spoke in simple, clear English, the voice of a neighbor, a friend. "Eleanor," he said softly, "do not sign this contract, please. Let me show you why." He laid the page on the table, his dirt-stained finger a stark contrast to the dense legal text. "They are trying to deceive you," he began, his tone patient. "They're counting on you not understanding the language, not just the Mandarin, but the language of the law itself, which is a foreign tongue to most honest people." He pointed to a dense block of text. "See this? Paragraph 4, subsection C, it's titled Water Access Provision. It sounds harmless. It sounds like they just want to use the creek, but look at the wording." He read a short, convoluted phrase aloud. "What that means, Eleanor, is that you are not granting them access. You are signing over the deed to the aquifer, all of it, the groundwater that feeds this entire valley. You would be giving them exclusive ownership of every drop of water under your feet. You wouldn't even have the right to dig a new well for your own garden without their permission. They could sell that water to bottling companies, to other farms, and you wouldn't see a dime." Eleanor stared at the page, her eyes wide with horror. She would have signed it. She would have given away the lifeblood of her land without a second thought. Sam's finger moved to another section. "And this one, paragraph 9, subsection B, site preparation and obstruction removal clause. They told you this was about being able to build an access road, didn't they?" Eleanor nodded numbly. "That's not what it says," Sam continued, his voice grim. "This clause gives Apex Global the unilateral right to remove any and all surface-level impediments for the purpose of resource extraction. Eleanor, this house is an impediment. The barn your grandfather built is an impediment. This clause gives them the legal right to bring in bulldozers and level everything on this property to get to the minerals underneath. And because of the indemnity waiver in paragraph 12, they wouldn't have to pay you a single dollar in compensation for it." He finally looked up from the contract and met her tear-filled eyes. "The price they're offering you for the land is less than 10% of its agricultural value alone. They know that. But they aren't buying a farm. They're buying a mine. The minerals and water rights combined are worth, conservatively, over $100 million. They aren't saving you from bankruptcy, Eleanor. They are trying to steal your family's legacy for pennies on the dollar." The truth landed with the force of a physical blow. The air rushed out of Eleanor's lungs in a choked sob. On the porch, Mr. Liu had finally found his voice. The mask of civility was gone, incinerated by pure rage and disbelief. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He rose from his chair, his fists clenched. "Who are you?" he snarled, the words grinding out between clenched teeth. The question was a raw demand for an explanation that could make sense of the impossible. Sam turned slowly to face him. The afternoon sun caught the lenses of his glasses, momentarily obscuring his eyes in a flash of light. He took off his glasses, folding them carefully and tucking them back into his shirt pocket. He answered Liu's question not in English, but in the formal, precise Mandarin that had so thoroughly undone them. "You wouldn't know my name," Sam said, his voice level and devoid of emotion. "People in your line of work rarely concern themselves with the architects of the systems they exploit. But for 20 years, my name was Samuel Croft, and I was the senior agricultural attaché and trade negotiator for the United States Department of State, stationed at the embassy in Beijing." He took a step closer, forcing Liu to hold his ground. Chen and Wei instinctively took a step back, as if an invisible barrier of power had just sprung up around Sam. "I sat across the table from ministers and corporate titans," Sam continued, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intense. I spent 5 years of my life helping to draft the very framework of the Bilateral Agricultural and Resource Integrity Pact, the very set of international trade regulations that your company, Apex Global, is attempting to criminally bypass with this fraudulent document. I know every loophole, every clause, every subsection. I know them because I wrote them. I wrote them specifically to protect people like Mrs. Gable from predators like you. The world seemed to stop. The chirping of the crickets, the rustle of the wind in the dry corn, it all faded away into a ringing silence. Liu's face had gone from red with rage to a ghostly, bloodless white. He was staring at Sam as if he were a phantom. He wasn't just being outmaneuvered by a clever farmhand. He was being confronted by the author of the rules he had just been caught breaking. The humiliation was absolute. The defeat was total. As Samuel Croft stood on that sun-beaten porch, the ghost of his former life solidified around him. For a fleeting moment, the dust and the scent of dry earth were replaced by the phantom aroma of stale coffee and ozone from a high-rise office in Shanghai. He saw the shimmering lights of the Bund outside his window, a river of neon and ambition that had once been his entire world. He had been a king in that world, a master of a universe constructed from clauses, treaties, and trillion-dollar trade flows. His mind had been a weapon, and the boardroom a battlefield where he had never known defeat. He remembered the weight of a perfectly tailored suit on his shoulders, the satisfying heft of a Mont-Blanc pen in his hand, as he signed agreements that would shift global markets. He remembered the thrill of intellectual combat, the parry and thrust of high-stakes negotiation against men as sharp and ruthless as Liu, and sharper still. He had thrived on it, fueled by the adrenaline of the game. He had a brilliant wife, Anna, a curator whose laughter could fill the cavernous spaces of their penthouse apartment, and a daughter, Lily, whose small hand in his was the only anchor he had ever needed. They were his why. Then came the rain, a sudden, violent squall on the Suzhou Creek Expressway. He had been late, stuck in a final meeting over soybean tariffs, a meeting that, in the grand scheme of things, meant absolutely nothing. He remembered the frantic calls that went unanswered, the gnawing dread, the call from the police, the robotic, impersonal voice delivering a message that cleaved his life in two. One moment he was Samuel Croft, master of his universe. The next, he was just a man whose universe had ceased to exist. The suits became costumes of a life he no longer recognized. The contracts were just meaningless words. The city lights looked like a funeral pyre. He had lost his anchor, so he walked away. He resigned, vanished, and drifted for a year before finding his way to this forgotten corner of the heartland, drawn by the promise of silence. He became Silent Sam. The physical labor scoured him, the sun burned away the pallor of the boardroom, and the earth slowly, patiently began to heal him. That quiet, healing world had just been shattered. But as he faced Liu, Sam realized the ghost of his past wasn't a curse. It was a tool. The two halves of his life, the diplomat and the farmhand, had just converged on this dusty porch with the force of a thunderclap. The flashback receded, leaving Sam standing firm in the present. The power in the air had irrevocably shifted. Eleanor, who had been watching this exchange with a mixture of confusion and awe, finally understood. Her fear and despair were replaced by a surge of righteous anger. She stood up, her back straight, her voice no longer trembling. "Get off my land," she said, her words ringing with an authority she hadn't felt in years. "All of you." "Now," Liu, sputtering, tried one last gambit. "Mrs. Gable, you're making a terrible mistake. This man, you don't know what you're doing." Sam just shook his head slowly. He pulled a worn, battered flip phone from his pocket, a relic from another era. He flipped it open and dialed a number from memory. The call connected almost instantly. John, it's Samuel Croft. He paused, a faint smile touching his lips. Yes, it has been a very long time. Listen, I'm in a bit of a situation here in rural Ohio. Yes, you heard me correctly. I'm calling on behalf of a client. Apex Global is trying to pressure her into signing a predatory contract. Yes, that Apex. Liu's division. He listened for a moment. I thought you'd say that. Look, I need you to connect me with someone at the North American Growers Cooperative. Someone who actually values sustainable agriculture, not just subsurface asset stripping. This is a good farm, John. Good land, good people. It just needs a fair partner. He nodded. I appreciate it. I'll wait for your call. He snapped the phone shut. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't make threats. He just made a single phone call. But to Liu, that call was a death sentence. Samuel Croft, a name that had been a legend, was back. I believe the lady asked you to leave, Sam said, his voice once again quiet and calm. Defeated, Liu and his associates scurried back to their SUVs like roaches exposed to the light. As the black vehicles sped away, kicking up a final, impotent cloud of dust, Eleanor Gable turned to the man who had been, for 5 years, her silent farmhand. Sam, she began, her voice thick with emotion. I had no idea. It's not important who I was, Eleanor, he said. It's what we do now that matters. No, she insisted. It is important, it's everything. She took a deep breath, her decision crystallizing. This isn't just my farm anymore. It can't be. I want you as a partner, Sam, a full partner, 50-50. We'll rebuild this place together, the right way. Sam was taken aback. The idea of ownership was something he had long since abandoned. He looked at Eleanor's determined face, at the land that had given him sanctuary, and for the first time in a decade, a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. He gave a single, decisive nod. It was a promise, a new beginning. Miles away, hurtling down a sterile interstate, the inside of the Lincoln Navigator was a tomb of silent fury. Liu was furiously stabbing at his smartphone, trying to get ahead of the story. His phone buzzed violently. The caller ID was Chairman Wang. A call from the chairman was either a coronation or an execution. Liu's blood ran cold. He jabbed the screen to answer. The chairman's voice was as cold as deep space. Liu, I just concluded a call with John Chenault of the North American Agricultural Consortium. He tells me he was contacted by an old friend. Samuel Croft. Liu flinched. Mr. Croft forwarded me a copy of your contract, the chairman continued. An illegal, embarrassing, amateurish contract. You did not encounter a complication, Liu. You walked into the home of the man who wrote the international trade laws for this sector and tried to swindle him. You are a clown. Your career with this company is over. Click. The line went dead. Liu stared blankly at the screen, his face a ruin of disbelief. In the back seat, Chen leaned his head against the cold glass and closed his eyes, wishing the world would simply swallow him whole. The call from John Chenault's contact at the North American Growers Cooperative came 2 days later. His name was Arthur Vance, a man with a voice like gravel and a no-nonsense reputation. He agreed to a meeting, but his tone was skeptical. The co-op had been burned before by distressed farms and hidden liabilities. I'll send a team, Vance had said. They'll do a full survey. Soil, water table, financials. If your numbers hold up, we'll talk. If they don't waste my time. The victory against Liu felt distant now, replaced by a new, more formidable pressure. Sam and Eleanor spent the next week in a feverish state of preparation. Sam, shedding the skin of the silent farmhand, transformed the farmhouse kitchen into a strategic command center. He unearthed old geological survey maps, cross-referenced them with county water rights records, and built complex financial models on a borrowed laptop, his fingers flying across the keys with a speed and confidence that mesmerized Eleanor. He was a different person, the quiet depths she had only glimpsed now on full display. Eleanor, for her part, rediscovered a strength she thought had died with her husband. She was the keeper of the land's memory. While Sam dealt in data, she dealt in a century of lived experience. She knew which fields drained fastest after a storm, which pasture held the richest soil because her grandfather had spread a unique compost there for 50 years, a detail absent from any survey. They worked side by side, Sam's global perspective merging with her local wisdom. A partnership was being forged, not just on paper, but in the crucible of this new crisis. The co-op survey team arrived a week later. They were not like Liu's crew. They were serious, weathered men and women who wore work boots and carried soil augers instead of briefcases. They spoke the language of crop yields and soil pH. For 3 days, they swarmed the property, their work methodical and exhaustive. Sam presented his data, and Eleanor walked them through the fields, her stories giving context to their scientific readings. The initial skepticism of the survey leader, a stern woman named Maria, slowly softened into professional respect. But their fragile hope was about to be tested. On the 4th day, as the co-op team was finalizing their report, a sleek black sedan, different from Liu's SUVs but radiating the same corporate menace, rolled up the driveway. A woman emerged. She was in her late 40s, with sharp, intelligent eyes and an impeccably tailored navy suit. She moved with an unnerving, predatory grace. She introduced herself as Evelyn Reed, senior counsel for Apex Global. She was not there to negotiate. She was there to annihilate. "Mrs. Gable, Mr. Croft," she began, her voice smooth but with an edge of tempered steel. "I am here to clean up Mr. Liu's unfortunate mess. Apex Global formally retracts his previous offer." She paused, letting the statement hang in the air. "Instead, we are exercising our legal right as the principal lien holder on this property. The bank has officially transferred your debt to us. As you are in default, we are initiating immediate foreclosure proceedings. We expect you to vacate the premises in 30 days. The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. Lien holder. The bank had sold her debt to her enemies. It was a betrayal so profound it stole the air from her lungs. This was their second attack, not a frontal assault but a flanking maneuver, using the cold, impersonal machinery of the law. Sam stepped forward, his body language calm, positioning himself slightly in front of Eleanor. "Miss Reed," he said, his tone even. "That's a bold move, but you seem to be forgetting the fraudulent contract Mr. Liu attempted to execute. That's a clear case of predatory lending practices and intentional misrepresentation. We'll be filing a countersuit that will tie Apex up in discovery and depositions for years. I wonder how Chairman Wang will feel about that kind of public exposure." Evelyn Reed smiled, a thin, bloodless expression. It was the first time Sam had encountered a true peer since his return. "Mr. Croft, I read your file. Impressive truly, but you've been out of the game for a long time. The world has changed. That countersuit will be a nuisance, nothing more. In the meantime, the foreclosure proceeds. The law is on our side. You have no capital, no leverage. The growers' cooperative," she glanced dismissively toward Maria and her team. "They're a cautious bunch. They won't touch a property mired in this kind of legal battle. You're isolated. By the time your lawsuit ever sees a courtroom, we will have owned this land for years." She was right. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, puncturing their hopes. The legal threat alone was enough to scare away any legitimate partner. Sam could feel the tide turning against them. Maria, the co-op leader, was already looking concerned, her phone in her hand, likely preparing to call Arthur Vance and kill the deal. They were being outmaneuvered. Apex wasn't just trying to buy the farm anymore. They were trying to crush it, to make an example of it. That night, a heavy silence fell over the farmhouse. The co-op team had packed up, promising to deliver their report but offering no assurances. The 30-day clock was ticking. Despair, which had briefly been held at bay, seeped back into the old house. Eleanor sat at the kitchen table, staring at the foreclosure notice Evelyn Reed had so coldly served them. It felt even heavier than the first one. "What do we do, Sam?" she whispered, her voice cracking. She was right, they have us trapped. Sam stood by the window, looking out at the dark fields. For the first time, he felt a flicker of the old doubt, the ghost of the grief that had driven him here. He had forgotten how utterly relentless this world could be. It wasn't just about being smarter, it was about having the resources to endure a war of attrition. And they had none. He had one phone call, one contact. Apex had an army of lawyers and billions of dollars. He replayed the confrontation with Reed in his mind, dissecting every word, every nuance. She was confident, but her confidence was based on a single premise: that they were financially isolated. You have no capital, no leverage. That was the heart of her strategy. If he could solve that, her entire attack would crumble. An idea began to form, a wild, high-risk gambit rooted in the world he had left behind. A world not of cooperatives, but of high-stakes commodity trading and futures markets. It was a dangerous world, one where fortunes were made and lost in a keystroke, but it was a world he knew intimately. He turned from the window, a new light in his eyes. "She made a mistake, Eleanor," he said softly. "She told us her strategy." He picked up the phone, but this time he didn't call John Chenault. He scrolled through a list of contacts so old he wasn't sure they would still work, names and numbers he hadn't thought about in a decade. He found the one he was looking for. A private number for a man in Singapore named Kenji Tanaka, a legendary, semi-retired commodities trader known for his brilliant, unorthodox thinking. They had been rivals, then reluctant allies years ago. The phone rang 4 times. Sam was about to hang up when a voice, sharp and alert despite the hour in Singapore, answered. "Moshi Moshi." "Kenji," Sam said, his voice steady. "It's Samuel Croft. I need a favor, and I have an investment opportunity that's going to make you a ridiculous amount of money." He was no longer just defending the farm. He was going on the attack. The conversation with Kenji lasted 2 hours. Sam didn't just ask for money. He laid out a plan of breathtaking audacity. He explained the situation with Apex, the hidden value of the land in minerals and water, but he pitched something more. He used Eleanor's generational knowledge of the land, combined with his own analysis of global climate patterns, to project a unique agricultural opportunity. A niche crop, a specific variety of heirloom soybean prized in the Asian market, that was perfectly suited to the Gable farm's unique soil composition, but notoriously difficult to grow elsewhere. He wasn't just selling the land's hidden assets. He was selling its future potential, a sustainable, high-yield product that would be immensely profitable. He framed it not as a bailout, but as a strategic agricultural investment. Kenji, a man who lived for calculated risks, was intrigued. "Croft-san," he said, his voice crackling over the line. "You disappear for 5 years to become a farmer, and you return with a play that is either genius or insanity. I like it, but I am not a charity. I will provide the capital to fight Apex, but it will be a bridge loan with severe terms. And I want exclusive options on the first 5 years of this miracle soybean harvest you speak of. You have 1 season to prove your theory. If your crop fails, I will own the farm, not Apex." It was an impossible choice, a deal with a devil to fight a monster, but it was their only choice. Sam accepted. The next morning, a wire transfer of $5 million appeared in a newly created corporate account for Gablecroft Farms. It was enough to hire a top-tier agricultural law firm in Columbus and post a bond to halt the foreclosure proceedings, shocking Evelyn Reed and Apex's legal team. They had expected a quiet surrender. Instead, they got a declaration of war. The fight was just beginning. Reed, furious at being blindsided, escalated her attack. Apex lawyers filed a barrage of motions, challenging the farm's water rights, questioning the property lines, and demanding endless, costly environmental impact studies. It was a legal siege designed to bleed them dry, to make the cost of fighting so high that even Kenji's capital would be drained away. Every day brought a new battle, a new stack of legal documents that Sam and their lawyer, a sharp young woman named Sarah, had to dissect and counter. While the legal war raged in courtrooms and offices, a different kind of war was being fought on the land itself. Sam and Eleanor, using a portion of Kenji's funds, began to transform the farm. They didn't buy shiny new equipment. Instead, they invested in a state-of-the-art soil monitoring system and a specialized drip irrigation network designed to deliver precise amounts of water and nutrients to the new soybean crop. It was a race against time. They had to get the seeds in the ground to prove the viability of their plan before the legal costs overwhelmed them or Kenji's patience ran out. The strain began to show. The 30-day clock of foreclosure had been replaced by the 100-day clock of a growing season. Sam worked relentlessly, often sleeping just a few hours a night in the new office they'd set up in the barn. The ghost of Samuel Croft was now fully in control, a master strategist juggling legal battles, complex agronomy, and the volatile nerves of a distant investor. But the physical toll was immense. He was thinner, the lines on his face deeper. The peace he had found in silence was gone, replaced by the constant, grinding pressure of the fight. One evening, Eleanor found him slumped over his desk, asleep on a pile of legal briefs. She gently placed a blanket over his shoulders. In that moment, she saw the terrible price of his return. He had sacrificed his sanctuary to save hers. She realized her role wasn't just to provide the farm's history. It was to keep the man who was saving it from breaking. She started managing the practical side of the operation with fierce efficiency, hiring a small crew of local workers who had been pushed out by larger corporate farms, and organizing the planting schedule, freeing Sam to focus on the larger strategic battles. They were a true team, each covering the other's weaknesses. As the first green shoots of the heirloom soybeans began to poke through the dark soil, a fragile hope returned to the farm. It was a small victory, but a tangible one. They were still alive. They were still fighting. But they both knew that Apex Global was not an entity that accepted defeat. Evelyn Reed was regrouping, and her next attack would be aimed not at the courthouse, but at the farm itself. The legal siege had failed. The time for sabotage was coming. And somewhere in a forgotten city, a disgraced young man named Chen was about to hit rock bottom, his path unknowingly leading him back to the place where his life had first unraveled, a place that might hold his only chance at redemption. The soybeans grew, their delicate leaves unfurling under the Ohio sun. Each new inch of growth felt like a victory, a defiant green testament against the sterile legal documents piling up in the barn office. But Sam knew this was the most vulnerable phase. Their entire future, Kenji's investment and Eleanor's legacy were all contained in these fragile plants, and Evelyn Reed knew it too. Apex's next move was insidious. It began not with a bang, but a whisper. Rumors started to circulate through the local community that the Gable farm was using a dangerous, untested fertilizer, that Sam was some kind of corporate spy planning to poison the water table, that their new irrigation system was illegally draining the local aquifer. It was a campaign of misinformation, expertly designed to turn their neighbors against them, to isolate them socially and logistically. The friendly waves from passing trucks became suspicious stares. The local feed store owner was suddenly hesitant to extend them credit. The attack was orchestrated by a man named Marcus Thorne, a local land agent who was secretly on Apex's payroll. He was their man on the ground, a familiar face who could spread poison with a smile and a handshake. The mini-boss was no longer a lawyer in a distant city. It was the community's trust, weaponized against them. The crisis came to a head when their application for a standard seasonal water variance was denied by the county board, citing an unprecedented number of anonymous complaints Thorne had manufactured. Without that extra water, a mid-season dry spell could wipe out the entire crop. They were being choked, not with lawsuits but with bureaucracy. "This is Thorne's work," Eleanor said, her hands clenched as she looked at the denial letter. "He's been a snake in this valley for 30 years. I should have known he'd be involved." She felt a surge of despair. These were her people, her neighbors, and they were turning on her. Sam's response was not to fight the rumors, but to bypass them. "We can't win a war of whispers," he told Eleanor. "We have to change the battlefield." He spent 2 days locked in the office, not on the phone with lawyers, but with engineers and meteorologists. He emerged with a radical plan. Using the advanced soil moisture sensors they had installed, coupled with predictive weather modeling, they could recalibrate their drip irrigation system to be even more efficient, using almost 30% less water than they had projected, placing them just under the threshold where the variance was needed. Furthermore, he devised a plan to install a series of cisterns to capture rainwater runoff from the barn roof, creating a supplementary reserve. It was a brilliant technical solution, but it required immense physical labor to implement the changes in time. Sam, Eleanor, and their small crew worked from dawn until long after dusk, digging trenches and laying new lines. It was backbreaking work, a return to the physical toil Sam had once sought as an escape, but now it was a fight for survival. During one of those grueling days under a relentlessly hot sun, a beat-up sedan with rental plates pulled into the driveway. It was Chen. He looked like a ghost. The sharp suit was a memory, replaced by clothes that were cheap and worn. The aggressive ambition in his eyes had been replaced by a haunted, hollowed-out emptiness. After being fired, his life had imploded. Blacklisted by Liu's enemies and abandoned by his so-called friends, he had bounced from one dead-end job to another, the memory of his humiliation on the farm porch a constant, tormenting presence. He had finally swallowed what was left of his pride and driven halfway across the country, fueled by a desperate, half-formed idea of apology, of seeking something. He didn't even know what. He found Sam not in an office, but in a muddy trench, sweat-soaked and covered in dirt, working alongside his crew. The sight was so jarring that Chen stopped in his tracks. This was the same man who had dismantled his world with a few words of perfect Mandarin. Sam saw him, straightened up, and wiped the sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove. He didn't look surprised. He simply looked at Chen and waited. The rest of the crew paused, watching the silent standoff. Chen stumbled forward, the words tumbling out in a pathetic rush. An apology for his arrogance, an explanation that he was just trying to impress his boss, a story of his ruined career. It was a desperate, rambling plea. He didn't ask for a job, just a chance to say he was sorry, to perhaps ease the weight that was crushing him. When he finally fell silent, his desperate appeal hanging in the humid air, Sam said nothing for a long moment. He studied Chen, not with anger or pity, but with the cool, analytical gaze he had once used on negotiating partners. He saw a broken man, but also one who was young, intelligent, and for the first time humbled. He saw a potential asset, "We need to finish this trench before sundown," Sam said, his voice even. He pointed to a spare shovel lying by the barn. "Grab it, or get back in your car and leave." It wasn't an offer of forgiveness. It was a challenge. Chen stared at the shovel, then at his own soft, uncalloused hands. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to escape this final, ultimate humiliation. But then he looked at his wreck of a car, thought of his empty apartment and the vast, barren future that awaited him. He walked over to the barn, picked up the shovel, and without a word, jumped into the trench and started to dig. The work was awkward, then painful, but he didn't stop. He was earning his place, one shovelful of dirt at a time. The first step on a long road back from the abyss. With Chen's unexpected help, they finished the irrigation adjustments just as the dry spell hit. While neighboring farms saw their fields wither, the Gablecroft soybeans remained a vibrant, healthy green. It was a stunning, visible demonstration of their superior methods. The whispers against them began to die down, replaced by grudging curiosity. Farmers would drive by slowly, marveling at the lush fields. The narrative was shifting. They weren't outsiders, they were innovators. Evelyn Reed and Apex, watching from afar, were furious. Their legal and social attacks had failed. The crop was thriving. Kenji's investment was on the verge of paying off. Their window of opportunity was closing. Reed, with Chairman Wang's pressure mounting, made a final, desperate decision. If she couldn't stop them legally or socially, she would resort to direct, physical sabotage. The time for subtlety was over. The final crisis was about to descend on the farm, not in the form of a lawsuit but in the dead of night. The harvest was 2 weeks away. The soybeans were perfect, their pods heavy with promise. The air on the farm was thick with a tense, fragile optimism. They had weathered every storm Apex had thrown at them. Kenji Tanaka was pleased, already negotiating futures contracts that would make their first season wildly profitable. Chen, now a permanent fixture on the farm, had transformed. The physical labor had hardened his body and humbled his spirit. He rarely spoke of his past, but worked with a quiet, relentless determination, as if trying to atone for his sins with sweat and calluses. He had earned the cautious respect of the crew and even of Eleanor. Sam, however, did not relax. He knew his opponents. Apex was a cornered predator, and that was when they were most dangerous. He invested in a simple but effective security system, motion sensor lights around the barn and fields, and wireless cameras that fed to his laptop. He started taking shifts at night, watching over the fields like a sentinel. His vigilance paid off. One moonless night, just after 2 a.m., a motion sensor tripped near the main irrigation pump by the creek. On his screen, Sam saw 2 figures, dressed in black, moving stealthily toward the pump house. They were carrying tools. Sabotage. He grabbed a heavy maglite and woke Chen, who slept in the small room in the barn that had once been Sam's. "We have visitors," Sam said, his voice grim. They moved out into the darkness, not toward the pump house directly, but circling around, using the rows of tall soybeans for cover. They could hear the clank of metal on metal. The saboteurs were trying to smash the pump's control unit, a move that would cut off all water to the fields and destroy the harvest. As they got closer, Sam recognized one of the men. It was Marcus Thorne, the land agent. The other was a local thug Thorne kept on his payroll. This was Evelyn Reed's final, desperate play, outsourced to a local asset to maintain plausible deniability. Sam and Chen closed in. "Thorne," Sam's voice cut through the night, calm and authoritative. "Step away from the pump." Thorne and his man whirled around, caught in the bright beam of Sam's flashlight. Thorne's face was a mask of panic and rage. "Croft, you just don't know when to quit, do you?" He brandished a heavy wrench. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns my business." Sam replied, taking a slow step forward. Chen moved out to his flank, holding another flashlight, creating a crossbeam of light that pinned the two men. Thorn, realizing he was caught, made a foolish decision. He lunged at Sam, swinging the wrench. Sam didn't flinch. Years of discipline and a life spent analyzing threats allowed him to react with cold precision. He sidestepped the clumsy swing, used the momentum of Thorn's lunge, and brought the heavy flashlight down in a sharp, disabling blow to his wrist. Thorn screamed and the wrench clattered to the ground. The other man, seeing his boss incapacitated, lost his nerve and bolted into the darkness. They tied Thorn up with a length of rope from the barn and called the sheriff. By sunrise, Thorn was in a county jail cell, and by noon, he was confessing everything, implicating Evelyn Reed and Apex Global in a desperate attempt to save himself. The attempted sabotage was not just a crime. It was the final nail in Apex's coffin. The news exploded in the agricultural world. A major corporation caught engaging in criminal sabotage against a family farm. The public humiliation was catastrophic. The next day, Sam received 2 calls. The first was from a terrified Evelyn Reed, offering an immediate, unconditional surrender. They would drop all legal challenges, pay a substantial settlement for damages, and publicly apologize. Sam accepted, but on one condition. The apology would be personally delivered by Chairman Wang. The second call was from Kenji Tanaka. "Croft-san," he said, and for the first time there was genuine warmth in his voice. "Your harvest is secure. My contracts are golden. You have not only met my terms, you have exceeded them. The loan is forgiven. Consider it an investment in a long and profitable partnership." The victory was absolute. They had not just survived. They had triumphed, turning every attack back on their enemy until the giant had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. 2 months later, the farm was transformed. The harvest had been a massive success, the profits even greater than projected. With their share of the settlement from Apex and the new capital from their partnership with Kenji Gable Farms, was a model of modern, sustainable agriculture. The farmhouse was restored, the barn renovated, and new, state-of-the-art equipment sat gleaming in the autumn sun. One crisp afternoon, a black town car, far more subdued than Liu's ostentatious SUVs, pulled into the driveway. An elderly, impeccably dressed Chinese man got out. It was Chairman Wang, there to fulfill Sam's condition. Sam and Eleanor met him on the porch. He was an old man from a generation that understood honor, and his face was etched with the deep shame of his company's actions. He bowed deeply, first to Eleanor, then to Sam. His apology was formal, sincere, and utterly humiliating for him to deliver. It was the final, symmetrical catharsis. The king of the corporate world, forced to travel to a small farm in Ohio to beg forgiveness from the people his company had tried to destroy. After Wang departed, Eleanor and Sam stood on the porch, looking out at their land. "They thought we were simple," she said quietly. "They saw an old widow and a quiet farmhand and thought we were easy prey." Sam knelt down, crumbling a clod of rich, dark soil in his hand. "Their mistake was thinking simple means stupid," he said. "They see land as a line on a balance sheet. They don't understand that it's a living thing. They came here with all the power in the world, but they left with nothing, because they never understood the first thing about the ground they were standing on." Later that week, Chen found Sam in the barn office. He had a packed bag at his feet. "Mr. Croft," he began, his voice formal, "the harvest is in. My work is done. I want to thank you for the opportunity." Sam swiveled in his chair, a faint smile on his lips. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," Chen admitted. "Maybe try to get back into finance or something." Sam listened, his expression unreadable. Then he reached into a desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper and a pen. He slid them across the polished surface of the desk. It was not a job application. It was a contract. "Gablecroft Farms is expanding," Sam said. "We're acquiring 2 neighboring properties and launching a direct-to-market distribution arm for our specialty crops in Asia. It's a complex logistical and financial operation. It requires someone who understands that world, someone who is hungry, ambitious, and smart, and someone who has learned the difference between the price of a bushel and the value of a harvest." The contract was for the position of Director of Operations, with a salary and profit sharing that would make him a wealthy man. Chen stared at the paper, his eyes welling up. It wasn't just a job, it was trust. It was a future he thought he had lost forever. Sam wasn't offering him a chance to earn his soul back from the dirt anymore. He was offering him a chance to build a new one in the light. The choice, once again, was his. This time, he picked up the pen without hesitation. Sam had already turned back to his computer, his victory complete, not by crushing his enemies, but by rebuilding them. And so, their destiny was forged, a new legacy built from the ashes of the old. Their story now belongs to time, but its power only grows if shared. The greatest wisdom is often found in the quietest corners, and true strength is not the power to dominate, but the courage to cultivate. But as one man breaks the system that trapped him, countless others are still caught in its gears. What happens when the person you trust most is the one setting the trap? If this journey marked your soul, leave a like and subscribe. For the best stories are those that refuse to die in silence.